March 15th, 1963. 6:41 p.m. West 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. A black Cadillac Series 62 rolled with the evening traffic like it had nowhere to be. And that calm was the first lie. An Oldsmobile 98 slid out from the curb and stopped nose to nose. A blue Pontiac Catalina tucked in behind and tapped the bumper once. Gentle, deliberate signature. The stake wasn't a stick-up. It was authority. If Bumpy Johnson looked breakable on his first day back from 10 years in Alcatraz, Harlem would be reassigned before midnight. But the first thing he did wasn't reach for steel. He asked a question that turned the whole block into witnesses. William Quick Davis drove, both hands locked on the wheel, eyes hard. Bumpy sat in the back in a dark overcoat, collar up, face quiet, watching the sidewalk more than the cars because people told you what the street felt like. And right now the street felt hungry. Two men stepped off the curb to Quick's window. One black, tied too neat for the hour. One light-skinned, pinky ring stamped with a tiny crown. They tapped the glass like they owned it. The black man leaned in, voice low, smiling without warmth. "He back there?" Quick didn't answer. The light-skinned man let his right hand drift toward his jacket pocket, slow, deniable, like he was teaching a class called How to Make a Legend Flinch. A woman with groceries stopped mid-step. A kid on a bike put one foot down. Somebody said, "Nah," like the street itself refused to blink. Quick glanced at the mirror for permission. Bumpy didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He stared through the windshield at the Oldsmobile angled like a wall and said, "Calm, roll it down 2 inches." Cold air slid in. The black man outside said, "Don't do this here. We got papers. Come talk inside." Papers. That word was the real weapon now. Harlem wasn't just corners anymore. It was leases, union cards, tax notices, and cops who smiled while they wrote your future. Bumpy leaned forward and asked, softly, "Who sent you?" The light-skinned man smirked. "You know who runs this now." Bumpy's eyes flicked to the crown ring again. "That ain't an answer." The hand hovered closer to the pocket. Bumpy opened the rear door and stepped out into the sliver of streetlight between the Cadillac and the curb. No ruse, no performance. He stood like the avenue belonged to his name. He looked at the light-skinned man and said, "Take your hand out that pocket." The man smiled harder and didn't move. Bumpy nodded once, like the decision had already been made for him. And the next motion was fast and clean, more choice than chaos, ending the lesson in seconds without turning the sidewalk into a slaughterhouse. The light-skinned man stumbled into the Pontiac, shock on his face because the legend didn't hesitate. Quick cracked his door but stayed half in, half out, scanning for the second hand, the backup hand. Bumpy leaned close enough for both men to hear and said, "Tell your boss you used your one free warning." The Oldsmobile rolled forward. The box broke, horns returned. The city pretended it was traffic again. But the people didn't pretend. They watched Bumpy slide back into the Cadillac like nothing happened. At 6:46, Quick drove north, taking the long route, watching storefront reflections for a tale. Bumpy stared forward and asked the only question that mattered. "Who knew our route?" Quick answered too fast. "Everybody knows your route." Bumpy corrected him, quiet. "Everybody knows my reputation. Routes are different." Silence filled the car, and in that silence Bumpy understood. This wasn't a street impulse. It was coordination. Someone scheduled this moment like a hearing. March 15th, 1963. 7:19 p.m. Back entrance off-street Nicholas Avenue. The jazz club's hallway was narrow and practical, built for deals, not applause. In a booth half hidden by a pillar sat a younger man in a dark suit, straight-backed, hands still, eyes bright with controlled hunger. He didn't drink. He didn't smile. He stood when Bumpy approached, respectful without acting small. "Mr. Johnson," he said. Bumpy studied him like a lock. "You got a name?" "Frank Lucas." Frank slid a folded napkin across the table and placed a thin file beside it. Gentle, like setting down a blade without showing the edge. "I heard they were going to test you on 125th, Frank said. "I heard wrong about how it would end." Bumpy didn't touch the napkin. Who are you to hear that? Frank answered like it was obvious. I hear what drivers hear. Union men. Loading docks. Back doors. Bumpy's eyes narrowed. Drivers talk too much. Frank shook his head once. Not the good ones. He tapped the file. Your problem isn't the ring, he said. It's the paper behind the ring. Bumpy opened the file. Copies. A lease transfer on a club near 133rd, a tax arrears notice on a West Side warehouse, a bank note tied to a shell company with a Queens address that looked harmless until you saw the signature line. Frank didn't brag. Center Street clerk, he said. $50. I didn't steal. I bought. Quick hovered by the door, tense, because truth from a stranger can sound like a setup. Bumpy looked up. Why are you giving me this? Frank met his stare. Because the men who want you signed don't just want your corners, he said. They want you visible, loud, sloppy. They want a picture. As if summoned by the sentence, the club's private line rang. Twice. Bumpy answered on the second ring, because only one kind of call comes twice. A smooth voice said, We can do this clean, Ellsworth. Bumpy didn't correct the name. You started clean on 125th? A pause. That was disrespect, the voice said. Be reasonable. Bumpy smiled slightly. Reasonable is what people call surrender when they want you proud of it, he said. The ultimatum arrived like a schedule. 9 o'clock. Rouse. East 114th. Back room. You signed control of 3 banks and 2 routes. You keep your name. Bumpy asked. And if I don't? The voice stayed calm. Then you go back inside. Or you go under. Bumpy replied softly. Harlem's a cell with better music. And hung up. Frank exhaled once. That wasn't an Italian voice, he said. Bumpy nodded. Somebody who rents Italians. Frank nudged the napkin closer. On it, a newer garage address and a time window, written like a delivery. If they're renting, Frank said, we find the receipts. Bumpy stared at him. You do logistics? Frank answered, simple. I do outcomes. Bumpy stood. Then you're useful, he said, not as praise as classification. And tonight, I need useful. March 16th, 1963. 11:47 a.m. church on 126th Street. The funeral for Curtis wasn't just grief, it was a head count. Reporters waited near the curb, tipped off by someone who wanted Bumpy photographed back in his habitat, visible enough to be targeted. Bumpy arrived in a gray suit, chin level, moving slow like he could afford time. Frank stayed half a step behind him, eyes on hands, not faces, because hands told you who planned what. On the steps waited a light-skinned man with a scarred ear and a folded program. The kind of messenger who never speaks unless the message matters. Bumpy walked straight to him and slid a thick condolence envelope into the man's breast pocket. Cash, public, undeniable. It was a trap. Refuse it and insult the dead. Accept it and owe Bumpy in the court of rumor. The scarred man accepted, jaw tight, eyes burning, and a camera snapped at 11:52. Inside, the pastor spoke about mercy. Outside, the sidewalk spoke about ownership. Frank caught a detail across the street. A man pretending to read a newspaper that wasn't open, posture too still, shoes too clean. Not a fan, not a local, a watcher. Frank didn't point. He memorized. After the service, at 12:36, Bumpy let people shake his hand long enough to feel his temperature, calm, unhurried, then turned to leave. The scar man finally spoke, low and controlled. Rouse. 9. Bumpy didn't stop. Tell your boss I'm not late, he said. The scarred man replied. You already are. That sentence wasn't street talk. It sounded like paperwork. In the car, Quick asked, what's that mean? Bumpy stared forward. It means somebody wrote my timeline without asking, he said. Frank added, and somebody fed them your route. Bumpy's jaw flexed once. Find where the feed comes from, he told Frank. Frank nodded. Center Street first, he said. Then Newark. Quick tried to joke and failed. We going to war? Bumpy answered flat. No, he said. We're going to surgery. Then he glanced at Frank. You cut, he said. I distract. March 16th, 1963. 9:04 p.m. Rouse. East 114th, back room. The table was square, tight, built for elbows and decisions. Two Italian men sat with jackets on like they planned to leave fast. A lawyer type with clean hands placed a contract on the table as if it was a blessing. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "this agreement ensures stability." Bumpy sat without removing his coat. Stability for who? The lawyer smiled politely. For the community. One Italian leaned forward. "You sign, you live quiet, you keep your little clubs." The other added, "Where you get loud and you disappear again." Frank stood behind Bumpy's shoulder, silent, letting Bumpy be the visible pressure. Bumpy slid Frank's documents onto the table. Liens, lease transfers, tax debts, shell company addresses. Paper that turned threats into liabilities. The lawyer's smile thinned. The Italian's eyes narrowed. Bumpy spoke calmly. "You're not offering peace," he said. "You're offering me ownership of your crimes." The first Italian snorted. "You ain't no saint." Bumpy nodded. "Never claimed to be. But I don't share blame like it's a meal." The lawyer tried again, voice tighter. "This is unnecessary." Frank finally spoke, short and sharp. "We got receipts." He placed stamped copies down. Names, dates, amounts. Union driver in the Bronx. Clerk at Center Street. Garage in Newark. You're renting muscle, but you're buying exposure. The second Italian glanced at the lawyer, uncertainty flashing because exposure doesn't just hurt business. It invites bosses to punish mistakes. Bumpy leaned in, voice low. "You wanted me to sign so the city could clap while I fell," he said. "But if I sign, you fall with me." The lawyer's eyes hardened. "1 week," he said. "Be reasonable." Bumpy stood. "1 week," he agreed. Then he added, softer, "If your boys reach for pockets on my street again, I won't answer the street. I'll answer your bank." They left at 9:29, and on the sidewalk Frank spotted another watcher. Different face, same still posture. "We're being scheduled," Frank murmured. "Quick ask, by who?" Bumpy answered, "By somebody who never has to stand outside." Frank said, "Then we stop standing where they want." Bumpy looked at him. "Newark," he said. Frank nodded once. "Before the week is up." March 17th through March 23rd, 1963. Harlem didn't erupt into a shooting war. It tightened into a vice, the kind you don't notice until you can't breathe. Frank moved like a man doing audits. March 17th, 5:30 a.m., Hunts Point Market. A refrigerated truck labeled "Produce" rolled toward Manhattan, but the crates weren't tomatoes, and Frank taxed the route with one sentence at a gas station on Willis Avenue. "25 a week," he told the driver, "or your tires keep finding nails." The driver paid because excitement costs more than tribute. March 18th, 9:22 p.m., 134th and 8th. A rival runner got stopped by NYPD, searched, released. No charges, just heat. Then watched his customers vanish by morning because the street hates attention. Frank never touched him. Frank touched his reputation. March 19th, 2:10 p.m., a landlord threatening eviction received a city notice for code violations and back taxes, and his voice changed by sundown. Frank didn't threaten. Frank mailed pressure. March 20th, 11:55 p.m., Bumpy walked into Small's Paradise, took the corner booth like a throne, and shook hands in full view. That was Bumpy's job. Be seen, be calm, make men lower their eyes again. It worked so well, Bumpy let himself enjoy it. March 21st, 4:40 p.m. He stepped out of shop on 57th Street wearing a new mink coat, paid cash, no receipt, and Harlem saw it like a lighthouse. Frank saw it like a mistake. That night, a Buick with New Jersey plates appeared in their mirror, always distant, always present. Frank didn't accuse. He verified. March 22nd, 3:05 a.m. He sent a decoy runner with fake slips toward 142nd and watched the Buick turn behind him like it had been trained. Not police. Contractors. Men who track cargo. At 6:18 a.m., Frank drove alone to a newer garage off Springfield Avenue. Walked in with $20 and a calm face, and bought 10 minutes of honesty. The owner produced a greasy logbook, and Frank's eyes locked on one entry that chilled him. The Cadillac's plate number, dated March 15th, the day Bumpy came home, before the mink, before Rouse, before the week. The street test on 125th hadn't been spontaneous. It was scheduled. Someone marked Bumpy the second the gate opened. At 12:41 a.m., March 23rd, Frank placed the logbook on Bumpy's table at Small's Paradise and opened it to the ink. "They had your plate day one," Frank said. Bumpy's smile died, not from fear, but from annoyance at being predictable. He stared at the page, then reached into his inside pocket and pulled a small old notebook, creased, personal, and flipped to a page labeled Curtis. Under the name were dates and visits. "Curtis didn't die by accident," Bumpy said. "He got turned while I was gone." Fed names for time. Frank felt the room shrink, because that meant the pressure wasn't just Italians. It was law, and law didn't need to fight fair. Bumpy closed the notebook and looked at Frank like he'd finally decided what Frank was. Not a friend, not a kid, a scalpel. "It didn't free me," Bumpy said. "They repositioned me." Frank glanced toward the window. Outside, the Buick idled at the curb like it owned the night. "To make you the headline," Frank said. Bumpy nodded once. "So the city can watch me fall?" he replied. Then Bumpy stood and spoke low enough for only Frank and quick. "They want me loud," he said. "So I'm going to be louder." Frank asked, "And me?" Bumpy answered without romance. "You stay quiet. You cut their oxygen." At 1:06 a.m., Bumpy walked out the front door where anyone could see him, and the Buick's headlights flared like satisfaction. Frank waited 10 seconds, then slipped out the side door into the alley, moving like a shadow with a purpose. On the street, the legend went left to draw every eye. In the dark, the scalpel went right toward routes, clerks, garages, and paper, toward the artery their enemies lived on. Somewhere far from Harlem, in an office that smelled like stale coffee and clean files, someone checked a watch and smiled, because the trap wasn't springing yet. It was tightening, and now two men were pulling in opposite directions, one making noise on purpose, the other disappearing on purpose, and the city was about to learn which kind of power lasts longer.